let's start with the history of this place, and then we'll go upstairs and we talk about Pittsburgh Yards, so you can see some stuff, and then we'll come back down. So I like to think of this place as sort of sacred ground. I have a lot of family connections with this property that I didn't know about until 2 or 3 years ago, even after I started the project. But I think for everyone in Atlanta, and I was born here in Atlanta, this is a really special place. So we have to go back to the Civil War. There was a white Methodist minister named Bishop Clark who was really concerned about freed slaves and their education, knowing that the war would come to the end at some point, right? So there would be millions of people no longer slaves, and the question was what happens to them and what's their future? And so Bishop Clark petitioned the federal government, and our understanding is he and his partners received $8,000. And so let's back up to understand why that's important. So if you think about what was going into the end of the Civil War, right after the Civil War, there are a lot of land grant colleges that were created. And so Bishop Clark petitioned the federal government, and the way we know this is that we have formed as developers what we call working groups. So these are neighbors that are interested in this development, and they have particular interests. So there's an art working group. They're working on right now a campaign to take pictures of people who currently live in MPUV, and that's going to hang as a mural there. They've created sets of banners of people who have been historically sort of leaders and anchors of this community that will hang from those rafters in the next 3 to 4 weeks. They've talked about exterior art. There's a graffiti artist that's very famous, that came from here named Sever. We have some of his work back there. They've been really focusing on art and history, and what they begin to recognize is art and history sort of go together, right? Because usually art documents the history of a place. So we, as a development team, work with them to go to the Atlanta History Center. And you go to Atlanta History Center and say, I want to know about Pittsburgh, and they bring up these big boxes, and we went through all of them. And we actually found Bishop Clark's diary. So after he got money, he was a Methodist minister. After he got money, every year he had to write a report saying how I spent the money. And so from that, we found out things like on this part of the land, there were blacksmith shops. We found a photograph of cotton growing at the very back end, teaching people how to be farmers. And so the history group then went to the Woodruff Library, worked with their historians, and they found a wealth of information and photographs, some of which will be displayed in the building, right? So we have, right now, I think, 9 active working groups: festivals, farmers market, art, history, like all kinds of stuff. And they meet once a month, usually at a coffee shop or here at the site. And they've been doing that for 3 years. The naming of the building, the naming of the site, the naming of the roads, all have been community members doing all of that work. So it's unusual for a developer to do that, because most developers, they buy the land, they hire an architect, they do what's called highest and best use. Highest money for me and best use for whoever's going to take it over, and the community is sort of secondary. The mission of this place is to do the exact opposite, right? And talking to community members, what we realize is that this place really is the living room of this neighborhood. I live in a house that was built in 1923. It's 2-bedroom, 1 bath. It's never going to be more than 2-bedroom, 1 bath. But if friends come to hang out, my sister comes to visit from Houston, where am I going to bring her? We're bringing her to Pittsburgh Yards. So in understanding that 3.5 years ago, it's really shaped this place to be something different. So we have to thank the community members that have been volunteering their time to really make this happen. And that's something that we'd like to start out with in the very beginning. So going back to Bishop Clark and his partners, they got $8,000 and they bought part of Pittsburgh. Y'all know where Deer Park is? Mm-hmm. Part of Deer Park, part of Capitol View, part of Capitol View. And so with all that land, it seems like a lot of land for $8,000. But really for an educational institution, it really wasn't that much land. So y'all know Tuskegee College? Mm-hmm. How many acres does Tuskegee own? Well, have you ever been to Tuskegee? Seen the campus? Nice little campus, right? How many acres do you think they own?
10.
10. Larger, more.
250.
250 more.
1,000.
It is my understanding, I could be wrong, they could have sold somebody at 50,000 acres, which is about a third of Metro Atlanta. I'm sorry, a third of Atlanta proper. 50,000 acres. But if you think about freed slaves, 40 acres and a mule, if you're trying to give everybody 50 acres, 50,000, you can only help 1,000 people out of millions of people who were no longer slaves, right? So 50,000 is not a lot. Bishop Clark really didn't get that much land. He was really sort of a small experiment versus a Tuskegee or TSU and schools like that. Make any sense?
Yeah.
So even though he was able to get this land, he was really fortunate in that there was a thriving black community in Pittsburgh. So y'all know where Pittsburgh is, starts right here. But really, this is Pittsburgh going that way, going towards Summerhill, going toward Mechanicsville. Pittsburgh has 30 active churches today. Any Sunday, there's 30 churches in that little neighborhood. The oldest church is Ariel Bowen Church, and its cornerstone says founded in 1860.
I forgot, but that's the church that I'm involved with. Mm-hmm.
So it's founded in 1862. The Civil War was when? Late 60, late 64. Some people say 65.
Yeah, I was like 60.
Yeah, so during the Civil War, there was a thriving black community out here. Not just like two people, like they were building churches and making institutions. And so Bishop Clark partnered with Pittsburgh and, Carver High School. Mm-hmm. That was the original Clark College. That's why it doesn't look like a high school. That's why it looks like it's 100 years old, because it's sort of 100 years old. Right? And so Clark College, of course, there was no I-75, right? But Clark College was there, and this was the farmland to feed all the students. And the reason that's important is because back then, Atlanta was only 6 blocks by 6 blocks. So y'all know 5 Point Station? Mm-hmm. So can you imagine a big city was only 6 blocks in one direction? But back then, that was really big for America at the time. And so if you've ever seen the movie Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara's running through the streets. They killed all the Confederate soldiers. She's running through the streets. She only runs 2 blocks, right? Because the city was only 6 blocks, right? You know what I'm saying? Like in the movie, you think it's like, oh, it's like this. It's like there's Dunwoody and Gwinnett and whatever. No, it was just 6 blocks. That was Atlanta. So this was really the country like jungle country, right? And we found in Bishop Clark's diary that people would actually take the train, which is this back hill, which we'll look at when we go outside. That was called the Confederate Railroad. Take it into the city, catch a stagecoach to come to the college. Isn't that crazy? Mm-hmm. You might have to stay overnight in a hotel to catch the next stagecoach coming out this way. So this was really far out. This might as well, today it would be Chattanooga, but like this was in the country. So to get food for students, they had to literally grow their own food, which is a great educational opportunity, right? You want to learn to be a farmer, let's feed ourselves. But this whole area was really self-sufficient. So today we have a working group called Farmers Market, trying to bring fresh food into this neighborhood. They were growing their own fresh food, or I guess it was real organic back then, right? But they were growing out on this property, out that way. And this was there's a trail going to the school. So, economic engine for Pittsburgh, right? You could now be a professor, janitor, cook, administrator, all within walking distance of your house. Not walk, well, you probably rode a horse and did something, but it was really close, right? And so, if you think about it, this place was a place where people could come and level up. I'm not in a great place now, but I want to be in a better place. This is where we came to learn, so we built a skill, learned a trade, created jobs. That's what this place was, right? So that's what we're doing today. So if you think about Pittsburgh Yards and any idea, people will say it's like Crock Street Park, it's Pond City. It's not any of that. We're building a place where people can come level up. And so we like to think of it as, I like to personally think of it as, I don't know if everybody thinks of it this way, but a place where businesses are born, scale, and grow.
Oh yeah.
Right? So you want to go from, I make, one case a week to 30 cases a week to have a factory. That is the goal of Pittsburgh Yards. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
And it's rooted in the original history of people wanting to make an opportunity for people, right? So that said, that's the old history. That's the beginning of this land that we know. I'm sure there were Native American Indians here, and there was dinosaurs here. Like we don't go back that far, but we start sort of the Civil War and come this way. So the Civil War ended. Things were good. A college was created, institution. My great uncle, Bishop John Wesley Gaines, in his book, wrote that he took a stagecoach out here to visit Clark and was so inspired that he and his friends put $1,000 together to form Morris Brown College. Right? So this was a beacon of hope for a lot of people. Other colleges were created because of this model. So things were going well for the school. Bishop Clark passes away, leadership changes, things continue to grow. And going into the 1910, 1920s, things were changing in America. So one of the things that's really important, if you think about Pittsburgh, which if we're on the roof, I can point out to you, McDaniel Street here is a very prominent street, right? And really, all the streets that were in Pittsburgh are coming onto this property. So if there was a McDaniel's over there, there'll be a McDaniel's over here. So the belt line has made us make sure there's not Pittsburgh Yards in the gate, but it's Pittsburgh Yards as part of an already flowing community. But McDaniel's is a very historical community. So one of the reasons it's so historical is because there were a lot of African American first in America in that neighborhood. Very proud neighborhood. So 1910, 1920, trains are booming, right? Atlanta already was a train town. It's called Martinsville. They changed it to Atlanta because it was where all the trains were, and are switched throughout the Southeast. And so by then, passenger trains were booming. And so one of the industries that was very easy for African Americans to get into was being a Pullman porter. Y'all ever heard of Pullman porters? Pullman porter, very famous, nice suits. If you ever read the autobiography of Malcolm X, he talks about the porters and how for a lot of people that was a real high-paying job because not only did you get a salary, you got tips.
Respected job.
I'm sorry?
A respected job.
Very respected job.
Black folks.
Very respected job. And so I don't know if you know the history of Pullman porters, but Pullman was out of Chicago, and there's actually a development called Pullman Yard. Mr. Pullman, who owned the train business, was very, very, very eager to hire people of color, particularly porters and bellhops. However, during the Great Depression, he was squeezed, and so he squeezed who? His employees. And so the employees, particularly the Pullman porters, decided we're going to boycott. We're going to form a union. It was one of the first organized, strong unions in America. Honestly, probably the first black union in America. Pullman porters were also known as sort of what we call today the black internet. So there was a Chicago paper, and they would take bundles of paper, not as part of their job, but every stop they drop off 3 or 4 copies so that every community along the way knew what was going on in America. So not only were they leaders in unions, and they were educators, but the other thing is they had lots of cash. So it's rumored that one of the first black bankers in America came from Pittsburgh, somebody to manage all the money. We know one of the first black orphanages in America came out of Pittsburgh, Carrie Pitt Steele. She found a lot of kids after the Civil War that had been abandoned, their parents were dead. She asked the train company, they gave her a train car, and she and those kids slept in that train car until they could build a house. And their house still sits in Pittsburgh. Very prosperous, very prominent, very well-educated community for a very long time. And so Pullman porters brought a lot of wealth. Again, another economic driver, the railroad and the college. Going into the 40s, the college decided to no longer be here, but to move to Atlanta University, which is now, the college is known as Atlanta University. But that building was sold, and all this land was sold, and this whole community really changed. Going into the 60s, we had desegregation, and what happened to black communities during desegregation? Everybody moved. Wherever your mama, grandmama, granddaddy lived, I'm gone. So Pittsburgh was left to be really sort of a senior community with a huge brain drain, and young African Americans moved to Cascade and all the neighborhoods, the suburb, Adams Park, everywhere they could live, but it left Pittsburgh, which had been a very strong, prominent community, and with McDaniel's being almost like a Rodeo Drive, to being more of a senior community with not a lot of upward mobility. Real challenge for Pittsburgh. Going into the Reagan years and the Great Recession, Pittsburgh was devastated. Absolutely devastated. But one thing that helped Pittsburgh was this became a trucking facility. So what you're standing in now was the second largest trucking facility in the world, Brown Trucking. And the reason it became really great in the 40s, late 40s, early 50s, is because 75, 85 was started. So as one of our community meetings, we have a map, we borrowed a map that's 18 feet by 20 feet, we roll it out like a carpet, and the city of Atlanta commissioned a photographer to fly over Atlanta and take little pictures. They stitch them together, and now it's a huge map. And so we told people at the meeting, take off your shoes, walk on the map and find Pittsburgh Yards. And what they found was this little pocket with 400 to 500 tractor trailers parked around this building. And the reason this was built here is because you could see 75, 85 coming into existence. So it was new technology, right? This thing called the expressway. Things that have to go on a train or a plane. Go on the expressway, and this building, we think this piece right here, this gravel, was a huge pulley system, because when you walk through the building, you'll actually see tracks in the ground where an individual could push what now would be a forklift worth of stuff, could literally push it throughout the building, unload a truck, push it, reload a truck. So this building was really an innovation for the South. It was a different way for people to move goods. And this was an economic driver for Pittsburgh. So coming out of desegregation, people could become truck drivers, managers, etc., until this building was shut down. The company went bankrupt. UPS bought the business. They thought they would build a training center here. Great Recession happened, no training center. And so it sat empty for a long period of time. It was going to be sold to the city as a scrapyard. And an elder from the community, she heard about this and was just distraught. She's like, if this becomes a scrapyard, it's going to be rats and possums and snakes rolling into Pittsburgh. It's not good. We're done. And so she started calling, I like to call it dialing for dollars, calling people asking, what can we do? Rumor has it, I don't know the absolute story here, but she called the Casey Foundation one evening and said, we need help. 48 hours, this place is going to be sold. They called her back a few hours later and said, well, we bought it. We're not sure we're going to do it, but it won't be a scrapyard. And so in 2006, I believe, this became the Casey property. It had a lot of cleanup, a lot of work had to be done, abandoned trucking facility, you know? And then they work with the community, ask the community, what do y'all want? And what do people, what does everybody want in their community these days?
Jobs, opportunity.
That's good. People, the first thing they say is, I want a Target. Y'all can go to Target, buy 3 socks once every 6 months. You're not going to support Target. Yeah. We want a Whole Foods. Next year, I want a Whole Foods. Whole Foods didn't come this season. So eventually it just became, what can we do? And jobs and opportunity showed up. And so a guy named Quaker Forstall, who became the leader of the Atlanta Civic Site, came to a leadership meeting, community presidents, 4 years ago. And I was president of Capitol View. And we sat in Adrian's living room. He's like, we really want to do something with 352 University. Honestly, I think we thought it ain't gonna happen. And he said something really profound that has changed this side of town, in my opinion. He said, test us. Which is really a challenge, right? Test us. So we did what community leaders do. We made PowerPoints and went to meetings and talked to people. And then we came back to him and said, this is what we see as a place. And he's like, let's try it. And so a few months later, an RFP, request for proposal, came out. A number of developers looked at this property, like I think it was 12. A week after they said yes, 8 dropped out. Because most developers don't want to deal with a nonprofit. They don't want to deal with community, right? They don't want to have to make certain changes to the way they do things traditionally. Sacrifices, very good word. But that's what was required to get this to be not a place that was going to promote gentrification, but a place that was going to provide opportunity, right? And so, by grace, our firms were selected, and we've been working on it ever since, right? And so that's sort of the story of where we are today. We hope to open first quarter, which means either February or March. We're almost done, but we got people that the city has to do inspections to get COs. But in general, we feel really good about this space. So if y'all don't have any questions, we're gonna walk upstairs. I'll show you all of Pittsburgh Yards, and then we'll come visit the NEA building. Any questions or thoughts? So let's walk. I want you to be really careful outside. Okay?